Hey there, welcome to Coffee with Kish. Yeah, that's right, still lacking the mug. It's pretty sad. Well, today on Coffee with Kish, and by the way, please like and subscribe. It's really going to help me out here. I'd like a lot of other people to see these videos. I think, we've got something good going on here. Geeking out with Mormonism, not being anti-Mormon, not being a missionary for the LDS Church either, just kind of saying, hey, this is what it's about. This is what I find interesting. This is what I think a lot of other people find interesting. Hope I'm right about that. Today, the topic is testimony. So, the word testimony ultimately comes from a legal background. It is a word that really comes from the law. To bear your testimony is usually in law to get up on the stand and under oath share what you know under questioning from an attorney, right? We've all seen the shows. But in a religious context, it's quite a bit different. Instead, you get up to witness as an LDS person. If you're a Mormon, you get up in front of other LDS people in Sunday meeting to testify of the truthfulness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the restored gospel, the LDS gospel. And this happens, once a month, usually the first Sunday of the month. There will be something called a fast and testimony meeting. And it's the case that, even though the LDS Church doesn't have a liturgical calendar to follow, that it does kind of have a cycle of the year that's set by weekly meetings on Sundays, first Sunday of the month. Members fast for a 24-hour period. A lot of them don't quite do that, but, they do the best they can. And they get ready to go to the regular Sunday meeting, but instead of going there and listening to talks and taking the sacrament, which is their version of communion, LDS people will go and partake of the sacrament, the bread and the water that's blessed. But instead of listening to little talks given by fellow members, it's kind of like the Sunday open mic day. And people get up and share their testimonies. They bear their testimonies. That's the language. They will bear their testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ, of the restored gospel. And the formula usually goes something like this. I bear you my testimony that I know the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. I know that President Nelson, Russell M. Nelson, is a prophet of God today. I'm thankful for the atonement of Jesus Christ. I'm thankful for my family. So you get this mixture of boldly testifying that you know something is true, and you also express gratitude for things that you believe in or are grateful for. And that's done once a month. Now, it is kind of an open mic, and what I mean by that is that any member can get up and bear their testimony, and they do so by what they feel is the prompting of the Holy Spirit. So the idea is that, kind of like a Quaker meeting where people meet in silence, but then the silence will be broken when somebody's moved upon by the Spirit to get up and say something. That's kind of the idea here, but there's less silence and a lot more talking. And there can be a lot of people in an LDS ward. There's only so much time in a meeting. The meeting lasts about an hour, but a lot of that's taken up by songs and the taking of the sacrament. So in the time that's left, if you want to get up and share your testimony, there's only so much time to do it. And I remember being in the position of thinking, oh, should I get up? Am I moved upon by the Spirit to do this? Oh, I ran out of time. And I kind of procrastinate sometimes. Did I do this a lot? Well, you'll probably not be surprised to learn that I didn't do it an awful lot. I did it a heck of a lot on my mission. But this is definitely, I would say, one of the rituals of Mormonism. Now, it may be funny for you to hear that word ritual because it's just getting up and talking, but it is kind of formulaic, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because there's a way of doing it, and people generally adhere to that method of bearing their testimony, and that performative aspect even impacts the way they do it, not just the language, but the tones that they used. On the mission, we used to make fun of the testimonies that our leaders would bear, especially our fellow missionaries who were in the mission leadership, like the assistants to the president. Yeah, we would make fun of the assistants to the president. We would imitate them as they tried to imitate LDS general authorities. Brothers and sisters, I know this church is true, and if you obey the gospel, you will be blessed. And I don't mean, I know that's kind of irreverent. I'm sorry if that offends some of you, but that's actually, we had a good time as missionaries. We were young guys. We'd make fun of our leaders, the young guys, the young leaders who were trying to imitate leaders of the LDS Church, general authorities, in the way they bore their testimony. Now, if you want to read about testimony as a ritual, I can recommend to you David Knowlton's 1991 Sunstone article on the topic of testimony. He was an anthropology professor at Brigham Young University. Testimonies are a big topic in Mormonism. People, of course, discuss what a proper testimony is. And those who become disillusioned with the church or leave the church are often critical of the ritual of sharing a testimony or bearing a testimony. And one of the things that often comes up in these criticisms of bearing testimonies is the fact that one will say, in bearing a testimony, I know the church is true. I know the church is true. And, for those people, kind of fading away, moving out of their testimony, moving out of their participation in the church, well, they start questioning that. It's like, what do you mean right? I know I thought the same thing as I started to leave. What is it that you think you know here? Because if I know something is true, I must know it's a fact. And if I know it's a fact, I must have a good evidentiary basis for knowing that it's a fact. And if I don't know that it's a fact, because I have evidence, archaeological, historical, etc., evidence that it's true, then why am I saying I know it's true? In what sense can one say they know something is true? And if they don't have that kind of hard evidence, I understand that. I went through that process myself. I feel a little bit different about it now that I'm on the other side of the equation and I've had time to reflect on it. Here's the thing. People, I would say, and here I'm sharing my opinion, purely my opinion, they say they know the church is true, partly because they are participating in a ritual that goes back to the example of Joseph Smith himself, testifying of the truth of the things that he experienced. And Joseph Smith experienced miracles. He experienced visions. He was guided by an angel. And, I'm not here to argue about the veracity of all of those things, but instead I'm trying to understand these things. And so what is a testimony based on? Well, I guess ideally it should be based on a spiritual experience that gives a member of the LDS Church a conviction that what they're doing in participating in the LDS Church is efficacious and good and approved of God and things like that. So it's not the same thing as I conducted a scientific experiment or I did a lot of historical research and now I know for an absolute fact that there was an ancient Nephite civilization in Mesoamerica or anything like that. No, it's I prayed about this and the Spirit indicated to me that this is true. And, even in saying that, I'm giving one version of what a testimony might be based on. Some people don't get that. And, I respect that. I did get that. Obviously, it's not a bulletproof guarantee that you'll always stay active in the LDS Church. I mean, I certainly didn't. But I would also like to stress that I don't think there's anything wrong with that testimony. I'm certainly not criticizing anybody who bears a testimony, who claims to have a testimony. But for me, it's a little bit too much of a reification of faith. It's like distilling faith in God into a kind of statement that one feels good about giving or doesn't feel good about giving. And I think that in a way, for me at least, it doesn't give enough room for you to struggle and wrestle with issues of faith and doubt. And I think it's actually, in an odd way, and maybe a counterintuitive way, actually fueled departures from the LDS Church, because there's so much emphasis placed on having a testimony and so much angst about whether one has a testimony or not, that it becomes the sine qua non. It becomes the necessary thing to have to really feel like you belong in this church. And I really think that's too high demand to place on people, honestly. I don't really think getting up and saying, I know X, is a good measure of whether you belong in a community. But that's my opinion, right? I mean, I'm just giving you my opinion. You can disagree with it. I'm certainly not going to be offended if you disagree with it. But what do I know, right? I'm not even attending the LDS Church right now, and I don't affiliate with the LDS Church by choice. But I do think about it a lot, and it's something that still means a lot to me in my life. Personally, I don't like these affirmations of belief that people engage in. I don't. Like, I believe X. I believe X. And to me, it's like, well, what does that really mean? But in other words, look, people can say a lot of things. I want to see how they live their lives. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having doubt. So if we place so much value on the idea of having this thing called a testimony and suggest that maybe it's wrong if you don't have this thing called a testimony, and we define that testimony as you being able to get up in a meeting and say, I know this church is true, that might be too much pressure. It might make people feel like they don't belong, and maybe they'll leave, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm not here to advocate for or against Mormonism. I just think it's interesting that this becomes the measure of belonging for a lot of people, and that it becomes a gateway for them to leave, whereas I think the purpose that it's supposed to serve is to, through this sort of ritualized affirmation, and by ritualized, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's inauthentic or empty. The word ritual has a bad rap, and David Knowlton's article, if you want to read more about that, a positive use of the term ritual in connection with the testimony, read his 1991 Sunstone article on testimony as a ritual, because it'll help you navigate that topic better than I can here. Testimony, its history, it's probably rooted in Joseph Smith's own witness, the witness of the Book of Mormon witnesses themselves, who, placed their names on those two witness statements, the three witnesses and the eight witnesses. It became a regular part of monthly LDS meetings, and it's something that LDS people do to affirm their faith, to reconnect with their faith, and to wrestle with their faith. Ex-LDS people or disillusioned LDS people who are moving out of the faith, a lot of them will question their testimony because they're really testing the truth claims of Mormonism, often by a modern standard that has a lot more to do with secular methods of scholarship. Is the Book of Mormon an ancient text? Is Joseph Smith who I thought he was? And in doing so, they're really, oddly enough, kind of stepping outside of the ritual. And the results are that they don't really end up identifying any longer with the testimony. And so what will they say? They'll say, well, I lost my testimony. And having lost their testimony by their own measure, and I'm not questioning their judgment on that, then they say, well, I'm going to leave the LDS Church because I no longer have a testimony that the church is true. I've been interested a little bit in the men and women of other faiths who devoted their lives to living a holy lifestyle, monks, nuns, and I'm aware that a lot of them, some of the most famous, in fact, have gone through something called the dark night of the soul, in which they felt that they lost their connection with the divine. And some of them went through this for years, some of them went through it their whole lives, and yet they continue to practice their faith. It's an interesting contrast with LDS people who say, well, darn it, I don't think I have a testimony anymore, I'm out of here. You would think that the two phenomena would be closer together, and maybe sometimes they are, and I'm not hearing about it. That's perfectly possible. But I guess it's a little surprising to me how quickly some people, not easily, mind you, don't get me wrong, leaving the LDS Church is a very difficult process. It's a gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching process. It requires a lot of thought for some people, a lot of struggle and pain. So I'm not going to make light of a decision to leave the LDS Church, but it's quite a different thing, I think, for some of these people, for example, the Catholic tradition, who've gone through or wrestled with the elongated, many years long dark night of the soul. And, some might say, well, that's a good thing. Who would want to be trapped in that horrific state of affairs for so many years? And, fair enough. But it's also striking to me that in early Christianity, one of the principal metaphors that the faith had to describe what it meant to be a follower of Christ was the metaphor of the athlete. Now, ancient athletes, much like modern athletes, weren't normal everyday people. They were people who lived a lifestyle of dedication to their craft. And they would go and compete in these games that were held in different sanctuaries, like the Great Pan-Hellenic Games, the Olympic Games, for example. And it required a lifestyle of dedication to do that. And the rewards could be great. Despite what people think and the kind of folk belief about the amateurism of the Olympic Games, these athletes were rewarded very handsomely for their winnings, at the very least by the home cities that they came from to compete. And the Apostle Paul compared believers in Christ and compared himself to an athlete because of the dedication and the suffering that he went through. So this is not something new. And I'm not saying that this isn't something also that LDS people who struggle with their faith go through. But I also don't think it's anything shameful to struggle with doubt. And I don't think there's anything shameful about struggling with doubt and choosing to stay LDS. But I also don't think there's anything shameful about choosing to move on. And that's a harder, in some ways, that's going to be a really hard break because there can be a lot of big costs there. What I'd like to see above all is that people are kind to each other through these processes. That they're not mean to each other, that they don't exclude each other because of where they are on this journey. As I said, I don't really identify with these statements of belief. I recently saw an old acquaintance from my home ward posting the Articles of Faith. We believe in the literal gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel. We believe this, it's a list of 13 statements of belief that Joseph Smith produced in a letter in response to an inquiry, I think, from a journalist. I can't remember at the moment. And I bristle at that kind of stuff. We believe X, we believe Y, we believe Z, and but that's my personality, right? Other people find that comforting and affirming, and they like that. For me, it's always been more of a kind of an esoteric or inner journey, seeking for truth. And it's something I think I'm still involved in, even though I no longer affiliate with the LDS Church. I just do it in my own way. But here we are today geeking out about Mormonism, and so I'm going to talk about how Mormons tend to do it. Fast and testimony, meaning bearing your testimony. I know the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. If you go the first Sunday of the month to an LDS chapel, that's what you're going to hear. So let me know what you thought. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you disagree with what I've said. I hope that I handled it in a reasonably respectful way as someone who's no longer affiliating with the LDS Church. I have no problem with others engaging in testimony, but I can also tell you why I didn't really jibe with it so well. Of course, I did it, and I did it a lot, and did it enthusiastically as a missionary, but I no longer felt that connected to it as I started to wander away from the LDS Church. And yet, sitting here where I am now, I do understand and I do have sympathy for those who really value bearing their testimony. And so that's cool. If bear your testimony if it works for you in your faith, and do it proudly. And on the other hand, if you're having trouble with your testimony, don't panic. You're in good company. Lots of people and lots of the great saints of the world have struggled with their faith, and there's nothing wrong with that. And wherever your journey takes you, I hope you're happy, healthy, and that you do good for others. So that's the word of Kish. This has been Coffee with Kish, with his mug still gone. Thank you for joining me. Please like, please subscribe, please share on social media, and I'll see you next time. Oh, that's good. Take care. Bye.